Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
I'm going to suggest you rewrite this paper, Ron.
That bad, huh?
Actually, not bad at all. Your paper's very well written, but it has a major problem, one that we need to talk about.
Okay.
The novel you wrote about, The Wide Sargasso Sea, you know that's based on another novel, right?
Yeah, it's based on Jane Eyre.
Right. So why didn't you discuss Jane Eyre in your paper?
Well, I've never read Jane Eyre, but I also think that The Wide Sargasso Sea can stand on its own.
I don't think anyone would dispute that. Jean Rhys is a wonderful author, and if you were just reading the book for fun, but if you want to write an academic paper on this book, well, I don't think you can do that without acknowledging Jane Eyre.
I'm not sure. I mean, because really, isn't every book that's ever been written influenced by other books? So, it's difficult to know where to draw the line.
But we're not talking about subtle influences in this case. The issue here is a very concrete case of one writer basing her book directly on another book, and a very famous one at that.
But Jean Rhys didn't just rewrite Jane Eyre, did she?
If you'd read Jane Eyre, you'd know that what Rhys did was, in a sense, she reinvented it by writing it from the point of view of a secondary character in Jane Eyre. Antoinette, the main character that you wrote so much about in your paper, she's just a minor character in Jane Eyre, someone we hear about but hardly ever see. So, do you think that Rhys would have written The Wide Sargasso Sea if Jane Eyre had never been written?
I don't know. I mean, I saw a lot of parallels between Antoinette and Jean Rhys. They were both born in the West Indies, and then they moved to England as young women. Maybe Rhys would have written a similar book anyway.
Then why didn't she just base Antoinette on her own life? Why use a character someone else invented? And isn't there more to the setting than just where the author happens to come from? Don't you think there's more to the fact that Jane Eyre takes place in England, but The Wide Sargasso Sea is mostly set in Jamaica?
It's just that I already work so hard, and my schedule is so tight. Now I wish I'd scheduled a conference with you before I started my paper.
Well, I hold those conferences for a reason. Look, what you wrote is good. It's very thoughtful. You make some really original points, and I guess that's why I'd like to see you take another stab at this. Right now you'll get an okay grade, but I think if you just read Jane Eyre, you could write something really special. At least think about it.
Okay, but reading another book and rewriting the paper, even if I can find the time, I'm not sure I've got anything creative left to say.
Why does the professor criticize? Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Wallace, I just saw the grades you posted, for the biology paper.
Paul, I'm glad you're here. I was wondering if maybe some pages of your paper were missing from the copy you submitted. I mean, you had footnotes in the paper, but I couldn't find a full list of sources at the end of the paper. You know, where you got your quotes from.
Oh, I'm sorry. It must have fallen off. I can get a copy of it to you tomorrow.
That would be good. And while you're here, well, it's possible that another page was missing, too. I mean, I didn't notice a real conclusion to the paper. The ideas weren't tied up. There should have been a paragraph that did that. Unless you meant to introduce a new idea in the conclusion?
Yeah. You know that writing class that all first-year students have to take? What they taught us there was that a good conclusion should be open-ended, that it shouldn't just recap whatever was said in the body of the paper, but that it should raise new questions.
And that's what you tried to do in your biology paper on differential migration for my class?
Yeah, they said we should do it in all our writing, so I thought it was required at the university, a required way to write here. I thought I was doing a good thing.
Well, it's great that you took something you learned in one course and implemented it in another, but no, it's not standard style for the university. Besides, I'm not sure if you really fully grasped what they teach in that writing class. Because the way you wrote your conclusion, if that's what they teach, I don't agree with that kind of writing. And I think you'll find that most of your other professors, or science professors, will agree with me. A good conclusion should first focus on summing up the main ideas of the paper.
Well, that's what I've always been taught too, but this writing professor, he said that's not always the best way to end a paper.
I didn't know any of this when I graded your paper, and I just didn't understand why the conclusions seemed, well, so illogical. You see, only after you've summarized what has come before, then you might want to point to a new idea or question. But then you risk introducing something irrelevant.
Irrelevant?
Yes. I mean, you had lots of nice examples about birds, but I couldn't understand why you introduced a fairly long section on butterflies at the end of a paper about differential migration of birds. Yes, butterflies migrate too, but butterfly migration, that's another paper altogether. But now that I know what you were trying to do...
No, I know butterfly migration is different. I wondered why I got such a poor grade. I can rewrite it if you like.
That's not necessary. Look, now that you've explained things, I'd like to go over your paper again.
Okay.
Let's meet again next week.
What is the conversation mainly about? Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
So, John, what's on your mind?
Oh, well, it's nothing specific, you see. I guess, well, you see, the thing is, I'm graduating this semester and...
Oh, right. Congratulations. What then?
Well, that's just it. So, I was wondering if you, I don't know, maybe you had some ideas?
Oh. Well, I don't know. Maybe if you told me more about...
Well, actually, if I may, you were an English major too, right?
Uh-huh.
So, well, you were once in my position, so how did you deal with it?
Right. Well, after college, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I took a year off, and that was the first thing I did. And then I started a master's in English literature, and eventually I realized I wanted to be a professor. So, in other words, I kind of continued what I had been studying in college and ultimately decided I wanted to stay with it. But, well, you know, that was me, so I don't know. Why don't you tell me more about what's going through your head these days?
Okay. Well, I guess, I'm pretty sure I want to travel, but I also need to make some money.
Okay.
Because I'd like to be able to go back to school eventually, but I can't afford it right now.
But eventually?
Yeah. I was thinking a teaching degree maybe, or maybe journalism.
Okay, that's a bit more concrete. Okay. By the way, where'd you like to travel?
Africa, Latin America, Japan.
Nice, nice. Hang on. You know what? Another student of mine did this a few years ago. It kind of fits all you told me so far. There's travel involved.
Is it that volunteer thing, the International Assistance Program? The thing posted on the department bulletin board?
No, it's something else.
'Cause I was kind of curious about that.
No, it's something else.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember all the details, but Peter, the other student I mentioned, he did this a few years ago and got a lot out of it. You spend 2 years studying for your teaching certification, but you don't have to actually pay for the school. Sound good? So long as you teach English afterwards in one of the designated countries. So you'd be an English teacher.
English. Abroad. Sounds good. Why not?
If I remember correctly, there's a bunch of different places to apply for. I don't know about countries in Africa, but there's France and Japan. I have that information around here somewhere, but I'd have to find it first. I still have last year's brochure. I saw it just the other day, but tell me, are you really interested?
Yeah, actually.
Okay, then I'll find it. I know it's here somewhere. And you can stop by my office to pick it up tomorrow.
Okay.
Why does the man go to see the professor? Listen to a conversation between a student and a literature professor.
How was that conference last weekend, Professor Miles?
Great. I heard some really terrific presentations. Refreshing topics, too. About authors you don't usually hear too much about.
Why not?
Oh, well, it's a funny thing about academia. You'd think scholars would do research about every topic imaginable. But actually, some authors, some genres aren't respected very much. So not very much is written about them. Gothic literature, detective novels.
But that's what the conference was about?
Yeah, pretty much. It was kind of subversive, I guess. But there's a whole wealth of knowledge out there just waiting to be explored. I find that really exciting.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, you wanted to ask me about the final paper?
Yeah, which I see now ties into the theme of that conference. Since we're supposed to write about a book from one of those lesser genres, I was wondering, what about science fiction?
Sure, though it's a genre that's actually getting more and more respect within academia. There was even a talk at the conference about Jack Vance.
Oh, he wrote Planet of Adventure, right?
Yeah, he's a well-researched, respected science fiction writer. If you're interested in science fiction, you could look him up. That leads you to lots of other authors and lots of possibilities for your paper.
Great. Well, I'm relieved you think that that's a good genre to study. I'll find a book that interests me and do the paper on that. It seems like most people assume that science fiction is kind of like, I don't know, junk literature.
Yes, a lot of people do.
Yeah, but I've read some things, and I think that some of it is really well written, and it takes so much imagination to write sci-fi.
Well, careful, though. There's a difference between science fiction and sci-fi.
What do you mean?
Well, sci-fi, that's what you tend to see in films. It has all the spaceships and robots, and it focuses on exotic technology, the wow factor, like special effects, at the expense of a well-written story. I think a lot of people don't realize this and tend not to make a distinction.
Okay.
But true science fiction is much more intellectual than that. The story is very important, and even though it might take place in an imaginary world and it might have exotic gadgets, the focus is on the plot. Science fiction creates metaphors about our world and well, what it means to be human. It's meant to get people to think about real things like history and human behavior. That's worthy of your time, but not sci-fi.
Great. Well, can I let you know next week which book I want to write about?
Sure.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Johnson?
Hi, how can I help you?
Well, my name's Matthew Burns. I signed up to take Film 200 next year.
Film 200. Now, where did I put that enrollment sheet? I wasn't expecting anyone to turn up quite this early, but they did send me the preliminary enrollment and found it. And your last name again is?
Burns, Matthew Burns.
Yes, Matthew. Okay, here you are. So what's...
Well, I'm a bit nervous about taking a film class for the first time, and I thought maybe I could get a head start over the summer. I already have an idea for a script, and I was wondering if you could give me a couple of tips.
A script?
Yeah, a script for a film.
But Film 200 is not a filmmaking class.
It's not?
We watch films, discuss them, analyze them, write about them. We do a lot of writing, but we don't write a film script. I guess you were thinking it was a filmmaking class.
Well, yeah.
No. 200 is film narrative. It deals with how films tell stories, what narrative techniques are used in film, by analyzing a number of the classics.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we'll talk about how narratives in film differ from stories in books. Did you read the class description?
I was so excited to enroll in a film class that I guess I didn't pay enough attention to what kind of film class it was. I thought I was registering for a filmmaking class. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I mean, I can see how this kind of misunderstanding could happen. There are a couple of filmmaking classes, if that's what interests you, but I don't teach them. You'd have to talk with Professor Webb. Actually, though, there's no reason why you couldn't take my class as well as a filmmaking class.
I wonder if I could swing that. I can't get out of my English, biology, and French classes. They're required. And I wanted my fourth class to be filmmaking.
Which English class are you registered for?
English composition. It's a required writing class. All students have to take it.
Oh, yes, English comp. You'll be writing a lot for that class. This film class might fulfill your English requirement. You'd have to check with the English department. It's totally up to you, but Let me ask you, do you watch a lot of movies?
Tons, mostly modern ones.
Well, if you want to be a filmmaker, you need to be acquainted with the classics. Professor Webb could tell you more about what you should do. I recommend you talk to her. Then you can think about it over the summer. You can always add or drop a class in the fall.
Yeah, I think I'll do that. And thank you, Professor Johnson. You've been very helpful.
Why does the man go to see the Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Eric. How are things going?
Oh, I'm really busy with my workload. Some professors assign so much reading that it's like they think we have no other homework.
One of the most important things you'll learn in college is how to manage your time. How to, prioritize. When to say no to a social engagement if you have a paper due, that sort of thing.
I guess so.
So, how are you finding the material we're covering in class?
I've actually come to talk to you about it. I have a 6-month-old niece, so I find early childhood development really interesting. Piaget, that Swiss psychologist you told us about, his development theory is really cool.
Yes, his theory that cognitive development in children occurs in 4 stages that you can actually observe.
Yeah, so my niece, she's in the sensory motor stage now, right at the part where she thinks things disappear when they're out of sight.
Very good. She probably won't understand that objects continue to exist even when they're out of sight until she's a month or so older.
Yeah, yesterday we were knocking a little ball around and it rolled under the couch. She immediately lost interest and reached for something else.
Because to her, the ball ceased to exist.
Yeah, I've actually been taking notes on her behavior because I'd like to write my term paper about her, if it's okay with you.
Your term paper?
Yeah, I'd like to do a case study or something. Piaget watched his kids and, changed the whole world of psychology.
Wait a minute. Piaget didn't just observe his own children. He did exhaustive research over 30 years to develop and test his theory. And anyway, your assignment isn't to do a study. It's to research the literature on a particular psychological topic and write about it. And I gave you a list of suggested topics to choose from.
Well, what if I research something like, is it possible to speed up cognitive development? Like, if I reached under the couch to get the ball while she watched me, would she learn earlier that objects don't disappear? Or can't 6-month-old babies think that way yet?
I do applaud your initiative, Eric. However, I sincerely doubt you could get any kind of valid or meaningful information from such an experiment.
But I already put so much time into watching my niece.
Remember, this is only a freshman psychology class. You aren't trained in carrying out an original research project. I wish you'd come to me earlier, but, there's still some time before the due date. I suggest that you recheck the list of topics. At least one of them relates to cognitive development. Then come see me again if you have any questions.
Okay.
Why does the student go to see the professor? Listen to a conversation between a student and her philosophy professor.
Professor Miller?
Hi, Laura. Everything all right?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know, after this semester, I've decided to change my major.
Really? Why? I thought you loved philosophy.
I do, but I don't know. I have to be practical. It's great to take all these philosophy classes, but I need to start thinking about finding a job after I graduate.
Because, people with a degree in philosophy don't have anything to offer employers, right?
Well, kind of. Lots of my friends are business majors. I need to study something that'll actually prepare me for a career.
If I had $1 for every time I heard that. Okay, studying something like business is great preparation, of course, especially for people who already know their career goals. But for those who don't, well, what's yours? What are your goals?
I have no idea.
So, for you, perhaps it's not the best option.
That's a good point.
With a major in philosophy, besides the possibility of grad school, which I think would be wonderful for you, you know lots of things that are valuable in any career.
Like what? How Johnson tried to refute Berkeley's empiricism?
Well, what did Johnson do?
Well, you know. What Berkeley said was that we can't really know any objects, we can just perceive them. It's all about our senses perceiving things. Berkeley basically made the point that it doesn't really make sense to believe in actual physical matter. What Johnson did was, Johnson was trying to disprove that, so he kicked a big stone. He said that refuted Berkeley.
Uh-huh. So, what do you think of that?
Well, not that I'm convinced by Berkeley either, but I really don't think Johnson refuted anything. And I think Berkeley would just say that Johnson still doesn't know anything apart from what he senses. Seeing the stone, feeling his foot hurting after he kicked it, it's all still just based on his perceptions. Johnson can't argue that he knows anything other than what his senses have told him.
You know what you just did?
Told you something that's not relevant anywhere but a philosophy class?
No, you demonstrated well-developed analytical skills. Philosophy majors can critique other people's reasoning, make a convincing argument, summarize, and communicate very effectively. These things are important in any career and in life.
Okay, but still, you don't see any of that in job descriptions.
Really? I think you do. I've seen so many articles lately by heads of companies in all kinds of fields complaining that it's hard to find employees who can do that. Ask at the Career Services Office. They'll tell you the same thing.
Well, I guess Career Services would know.
Also, why don't you think about, our department always has information about summer internships. That'll give you some concrete experience to put on your resume.
That's an idea.
An internship could help you get your foot in the door.
What is the conversation mainly about?
Listen to a conversation between a student and her environmental science professor.
You know, the DVD we watched yesterday on ways we can protect the environment was really eye-opening.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes a DVD like this can bring to life concepts that my lectures can't. Of course, lectures are important, but other forms of presentation, like DVDs, help get across the concepts I want you to understand, too.
I agree. And the DVD got me thinking about the project you assigned. Now, I know we're not supposed to work with anyone else for this assignment, but two of us think we have a really good idea.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, the student from class who I want to work with, it's Jessica Smith. You see, she has a part-time job at the hotel on campus, where parents and people who are here for conferences stay.
Ah, yes. The Environmental Science Department just hosted a conference not too long ago, and we had several attendees who stayed there. They really enjoyed staying at that hotel.
I'm sure. Jessica says it's really nice, but it's not so environmentally friendly.
I see. Well, hotels may be reluctant to make changes to protect the environment if it could be perceived as negatively affecting the comfort of hotel guests.
Well, that has to do with our idea for the project. Jessica and I want to do an assessment of the hotel and see what they can do to save energy and create less pollution without interfering with the positive experience of patrons. And I figured since she works there, it'd be easier for us to do the project together. Plus, she already ran the idea by the hotel manager, and he's on board with it. He was even telling her how he can use our work to apply for a grant from a local environmental foundation for money to make energy-saving upgrades and stuff. So we'd make recommendations, then he'd use our findings to make real changes.
That's certainly a compelling idea, and it definitely fits within the general guidelines of the project. Okay, just give me an outline of what you plan to do, and, well, I'm a little worried. I'll still need you to submit the paper in the format we discussed in class, not whatever format the hotel manager might want.
What is the conversation mainly about?
Listen to a conversation between a student and her academic advisor.
Thanks for stopping by, Shelley. Professor Miller sent me an email, and I thought we'd better have a little chat.
Professor Miller? The art history professor?
Yes. I'm concerned because midterm grades are due in a couple of weeks, and he says you haven't completed a single assignment for his course. And he didn't want to turn in a failing grade without making sure that—
Wait, I'm not taking his course. I dropped it.
You did? Well, according to the registrar's office, you're still enrolled in it. I pulled up your file. Your schedule shows that you are officially enrolled in Introduction to Art History with Professor Miller, Islamic Art with Professor Campbell. Well, here, you look at it. You're registered for 5 courses.
But I'm enrolled in only 4 courses this semester. I mean, I did sign up for Introduction to Art History initially, but when Professor Campbell gave me permission to enroll in his Islamic art course, I dropped Professor Miller's course. Or at least I intended to. I had to. They meet at the same time.
I see. So your admission to the Islamic art course was not contingent on your completion of the art history course.
Well, Professor Campbell waived the prerequisite in my case because he felt that I had enough background in art history to handle his course. But you know, now that I think about it, maybe I just added Professor Campbell's course and forgot to drop Professor Miller's course.
I guess it's possible. Still, I'm surprised we didn't catch it earlier in the semester. Didn't you and I meet at the end of the second week of classes to finalize your course selections?
No. I mean, I remember getting an email about setting up a meeting with my advisor, but I thought it was only for people who had an enrollment problem or something they needed to work out. I didn't realize it was a requirement.
Well, it's strongly recommended that students meet with their advisors early in the semester, and now you can see why. But there's no real harm done. However, don't forget to file a formal withdrawal from Introduction to Art History with the registrar's office by Friday, when the withdrawal period ends. And you might want to apologize to Professor Miller as well.
Oh, I'll definitely make a point of dropping by his office to explain what happened. I was just so focused on getting admitted into the Islamic art course, and so happy when Professor Campbell said I could take it, that I kind of forgot about everything else.
Why did the advisor ask the student to meet with him?
Listen to a conversation between a student and the professor of her theater class.
So, Professor Baker, about our next assignment you talked about in class.
Yes, this time you'll be in groups of 3. Each of you will have a chance to direct the other 2 in a short scene from a play you've chosen yourself.
Right. And, well, I've been reading about story theater and...
Story theater? Tell me about what you've read.
Well, it's a form of theater where folk or fairy tales are acted out. It was introduced by the director Paul Sills in the 1960s. In Sills's approach, an actor both narrates and acts out a tale. So, like someone will appear on stage, and then they'll start narrating a tale about, say, a king. And then the same person will immediately switch to and start acting out the role of the king, with no props or scenery.
Sills. You know, I actually saw his first story theater production in 1968. He did the fairy tale The Blue Light.
Really? So whatever gave him the idea to produce that?
Well, as you know, back in the late 1960s, lots of people in the United States were disillusioned with the government. Sills was grappling with how to produce theater that was relevant in such times. Then he happened to read The Blue Light, and he realized it had just the message he wanted. See, in the story, a man who's lost all hope as a result of the unfortunate events in his life completely turns his life around with the help of a magical blue light. So, the blue light in the story symbolizes a way out of seemingly unsolvable human problems. And for Sills, that light symbolized an answer to the political turmoil in the U.S.
But weren't you, audiences bothered that the actors were performing on a bare stage?
Well, story theater is a departure from traditional dramatic theater with its realistic, elaborate props and scenery, but Sills could make us see, say, a big tall mountain through the facial expressions and body movements of the actors and their telling of the story. We were all swept up, energized by such an innovative approach to theater, even if 1 or 2 of the critics weren't as enthusiastic.
Cool. So, anyway, what I really wanted to ask, I'd love to try doing story theater for my project, instead of just a scene from a traditional play.
That's possible. A short tale can be about the same length as a single scene. Which fairy tale would you do?
Actually, I was reading about another director of story theater, Rex Stevenson. You know, he produces plays based on folk tales as well. Maybe I could direct one of those.
Okay, yes, Rex Stevenson. Now, Stevenson's style of story theater is a little different from Sills's. He'll use simple props. A chair will represent a mountain, but the significant difference is with the narrator. The narrator will play only that role. Let's talk about why.
Why does the student go to see the professor?
Why
does the student go to see the professor?
Listen to